The first PAAV Summit Series event. We all want to thank you for hopping on and joining this panel discussion, and we want to thank our speakers today for being able to join us from all across the country. We also wanted to give a special thanks to SAE, who is the official sponsor of the PA Summit Series. We wanted to let everyone know that the Summit Series is going to be 7 events that are leading up to the 2021 Summit in October. This really came about because the 2020 Summit had to be canceled this past October. We also want to thank our hosts for the Summit, and the Summit Series, which is ITSPA and Maysite, along with our conveners in PennDOT, the Turnpike, and the Department of Economic Development. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items I want to announce to everyone. The first is that we will be recording this session. We will let everyone know afterwards where the session will be posted so you can go back and watch it later. The next thing that we're going to ask for all of our attendees is that if you could please keep yourself on mute during the presentation. We will be opening the chat up to ask any questions. We ask that you pose any questions to what our speakers are saying in the chat, and we'll have someone monitoring that and bring it up during the session. The third thing is that there will be PDHs offered for this session. Right now, you should get an email sent to you after the session regarding how to claim those PDHs. So be on the lookout for that later this afternoon. And the last thing we're going to say is that there's going to be at least 2 polls that are posted during the session for you guys. We ask the audience participates, and that will give our speakers some more information for what the audience is looking to hear. And the first poll should actually be coming your way right now. And again, as I noted, we have 5 great speakers today. I have them all listed here. And then my name's Drew Horgan. I'll be moderating today's session on behalf of ITSPA. And as this poll is going, we'll let this go. So the speaker should be able to see this just to get a feel for who's on the line and what sectors are represented to maybe kind of tailor your comments and remarks that way. And I guess with that, John, I'll turn it over to you. I know you want to share your screen, so I'll stop sharing.
That's fantastic. Can you still hear me okay, Drew?
Yep, I can hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you to ITS Pennsylvania and other sponsors of this event. I'll just say as a quick acknowledgement, if you ever have to pick just one webinar on which to serve as a panelist, pick one supported by ITS Pennsylvania. The team that supported us in preparing for this and planning for this just did a fantastic job to make this easy to the point of being fun. So thanks again. Thanks also for long-standing and consistent leadership from the state of Pennsylvania through the Pennsylvania DOT and also the Pennsylvania Turnpike and others. I know many local agencies, industry partners. You have been a model and continue to be a model for the integration of emerging technologies into operations. By the way, how's my screen share coming across, Drew?
I can see it. It looks a little small to me. I'm not sure, Kevin, if you're seeing the same thing. I have a couple other windows open for the poll and stuff like that, so I might not be the best person. But I see it looks like you have a couple things open.
Okay. So what I intended to show you was let me try this again. You should just be seeing the AV comprehensive plan, but you're seeing more than that. So I'm gonna actually abandon that attempt. If you haven't seen the AV comprehensive plan, that's what I'll be talking towards and around at least for part of what I have to say. We'll also have some things to say about the FHWA National Roadway Automation Concept of Operations, or CONOPS, a digital infrastructure framework that we're beginning to evolve internal to FHWA. in collaboration, kind of indirectly with some work in TRB to better talk about broader issues associated with digital infrastructure. And then I'll touch briefly on some AV infrastructure impacts research that has been done and is being initiated by FHWA. One reason I don't have a slide deck is because most of the more intensive technical content will come from the august panel that I'm privileged to be part of, honored to be part of, a little bit intimidated to be part of. And so I'll provide kind of some upfront context based on the AV comprehensive plan and some other things I mentioned, get out of the way for them and then participate with them in some concluding discussion. I do want to, in addition to acknowledging the leadership from the state of Pennsylvania, congratulate them early, I think pretty fresh, on the best Pismo project of the year, just awarded by NOCOE, being announced over the last few days and even this morning, for their work, for your work, PennDOT, on the Pismo performance program and traffic operations analytics tool, reminding us that ultimately technology serves the purpose of supporting us in optimizing the performance of traffic and transportation operations. I mentioned, and it's clarified in the AV comprehensive plan, that the role of the Federal Highway Administration within the US DOT is focused towards roadway infrastructure systems and the operation of those systems and the movement of traffic, including freight, on the national roadway system, including the interstates and the National Highway Network. NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, remains the lead agency within US DOT when it comes to monitoring ADS vehicle testing, or automated driving system vehicle testing, and anticipating and setting vehicle safety standards. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration similarly addresses AV safety as it pertains to large trucks. The Federal Transit Administration has a role in things like automated buses and AV shuttles. So I'll kind of represent the part of US DOT that deals with roadway infrastructure systems towards the issue of automation readiness, which is the theme of this particular webinar. The AV comprehensive plan is I would say almost surprisingly understandable yet comprehensive document released in very early January. It was actually the initial impetus for an internal facing US DOT coordinative type comprehensive plan. Actually goes back to November 2017 from the Government Accountability Office, and GAO suggested that might help the federal government move forward and US DOT provide leadership in that context. And so if you look at, and I would encourage you, and I'll put several links to which I'll allude in my brief comments in the chat pod when I'm done talking, just in the interest of efficiency and personal focus. But the AV comprehensive plan reinforces what has been developed over the last 4 years, building on AV 2.0, which is a policy document focused toward NHTSA and the vehicle side of automation, AV 3.0, and I'm using kind of a shorthand reference to it, which was more broadly a clarification of US DOT roles across the modal agencies, including those to which I alluded earlier. AV 4.0, through US DOT leadership, kind of projected the AV space across other relevant federal agencies, including some that you may not have thought of initially, like NASA, which has significant relevant, maybe not to road traffic, but to transportation automation in general. The AV comprehensive plan, as it's been introduced, I think is a great point of transition into now an arriving administration, which will, I expect, view the comprehensive plan as a valuable resource in understanding what's underway and beginning to kind of impart kind of a next iteration of policy priorities and other priorities for the department that you're seeing talked about by a number of the new appointees in the media. The comprehensive plan acknowledges that FHWA's role is significant in building relationships and partnerships, particularly with the infrastructure owner-operator community. That's noted explicitly several times by the acknowledgement of the AASHTO, ITS America, and ITE collaboratively hosted Cooperative Automated Transportation, or CAT Coalition, which I have no doubt many on this webinar are active participants and even volunteer leaders within. It recognizes the value of requests for comment and requests for information that Federal Highway Administration has facilitated, including the now somewhat dated National Dialogue on Highway Automation workshop series conducted in 2018. It recognizes the significant work that we and you have done and are doing in the exploration and development of national data exchanges, including the one that is being advanced for work zones, one that is being conceptualized and advanced for traffic regulation information, that it can be very location and jurisdiction specific, very challenging for automated driving systems to accurately perceive based on their operational design domain and specifically where they are. So it recognizes FHWA's role in that aspect of what I would characterize more broadly as digital infrastructure, and also FHWA's continued role in supporting the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, including the Notice of Proposed Amendment, which is out and warrants your review and begs your comments and feedback. It is the first version of the MUTCD proposed that would address by a dedicated chapter, for example, the implications of automated driving systems for roadway traffic control devices and traffic control systems, and vice versa. Finally, the plan acknowledges the role of cooperative driving automation and the significance of cooperative driving automation, as it has been very, very clearly and in a very timely manner defined through SAE's leadership as a standards development organization, to reflect some of the work and build on some of the work into kind of a national deployment posture that's been developed through the Federal Highway Administration Research Office and their work on CARMA, the Cooperative Automation Research Mobility Application. I trust you have heard about CARMA. There's a lot of valuable information, including a recently released series of very informative and friendly videos on what Federal Highway Administration is doing in this cooperative driving automation space, specifically through CARMA. I would also encourage you to look at, and I'll put a link to a really quickly released external white paper on something called VOICES. The acronym stands for Virtual Open Innovation Collaborative Environment for Safety. As you may suspect, one of the reasons for the length and complexity of the acronym is it's an initiative being done in collaboration with the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense, in the interest of leveraging the value of what your federal tax dollars have created in the defense environment for remote virtual collaboration in near real time and real time, and porting those tools into the collaborative space and the quote unquote synthetic environment, if you will, necessary to more intensely simulate and model the behaviors of automated driving systems, but also to collaborate between individuals and research entities. And so look for more and anticipate more on particularly VOICES and CARMA as one of the punctuation points within the AV Comprehensive Plan. I'll highlight a few more things more quickly than I scan the AV Comprehensive Plan. I alluded to the FHWA National Roadway Automation Concept of Operations. I tend to think we might have been better served, and we may migrate the title of that to more of a national concept of integration. The CONOPS, as it's currently being developed, is about halfway through its development. We actually have a significant stakeholder engagement workshop with a group of people that have been very capably informing and advising us over the last year and a half. And that CONOPS is intended to be a very high-level definitional document for describing the systemic interfaces between the vehicle and the roadway, increasingly as an integrated system, but also the human and the institutional systemic interfaces between the transportation agencies that manage and regulate that vehicle roadway environment and ultimately the travelers, the shippers, and the communities served by that vehicle roadway environment as enabled and managed by the respective transportation agencies. And so the ConOps, not unlike a really interesting document that FAA put out, which is they also call a ConOps for urban air mobility. It's intended to be like the FAA ConOps, not the intensive, sometimes almost painfully dense and large ConOps that are part or can be part of a systems engineering process, but more so, a 30, 40, 50 page graphically oriented kind of high level conceptual view of how systems can interact with one another and be integrated into communities ultimately at a national scale and a national network scale. The ADS roadway use cases that are being developed in the ConOps are illustrative. It's intended that they will be kind of superimposed on a set of typical integration settings, and that will support continued development as a basis for scenario-based planning for AV and other emerging mobility technologies. And as some of you that are much more expert than I am in transportation planning are aware, scenario planning is evolving to be a very valuable kind of probabilistic planning approach that is amenable to a dynamic socioeconomic as well as a rapidly changing technological environment. Final topic is AV infrastructure impact. If you did not find time to participate in or review the recordings back in October that summarized the outcome of an initial project looking at that topic, I'll put the links to those in the chat pod. You'll see a chat message from me that'll be a long list of HTML or I'm sorry, of URLs in a moment. Some of them will be the links to the recordings for the 3 webinars, one on traffic control devices, one on physical infrastructure and operations or other physical infrastructure related to operations, and then one on agency readiness and kind of institutional and organizational facets of AV infrastructure impacts. That project landed with an understanding that ADS in their current stage of testing, it really has yet to be sufficiently developed and more broadly matured to have an accurate kind of comprehensive representative understanding of how ADS perceived the roadway environment in a more intensive and detailed way. What we have learned, we've learned largely from a relatively small set of specific ADS developers. A few things that have come up as very significant are, if you will, plain old pavement marking, and yes, bigger and brighter is always better, but maintaining and committing to a consistent quality of the pavement markings as they're standardized and deployed today is probably the most immediate issue to be addressed, and you'll see that resonate with what you can comment on and review in the MUTCD notice of proposed amendment. There is follow-on research building towards an initial high-level kind of cost assessment or assessment of cost implications of AV infrastructure impacts. That's a project that is really just kind of getting off the launch pad. There is a related project looking in a more real-world physical way at specific weather impacts and implications for ADS operations by testing ADS under close monitoring and in a very highly connected way to look at how they react to snow and ice and wind and rain and other more challenging weather features, which have been a significant constraint right now for where ADS and automated vehicles are most consistently tested. With that, again, I'm grateful to be part of the discussion. I look forward to learning from the more technically intensive and practical presentations you'll hear momentarily. Drew, I'll turn it back to you and look forward to joining in the conversation a little bit later.
Thanks very much, John. And I guess if you could share those links in the chat, I'm sure everyone would be interested to look at those. And if anyone has any questions for John, please feel free to send them in the chat as well. Next up, we have Kristen White.
Good afternoon, friends and colleagues in Pennsylvania. My name is Kristen White, and I am with Minnesota's Connected and Automated Vehicle Office, known as CAVX. The X stands for the many unknowns, many of which your community is already planning for. So before I begin today, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. I regularly have the pleasure of coordinating with the Pennsylvania DOT and many of your stakeholders, including my esteemed colleague, Mark Kotko, who I know is here today. So I want to thank you for the ability for me right now in snowy and cold Minnesota to talk about some of the challenges we're planning for with automation, weather, and the many other opportunities we have in front of us. Next slide, please. One of the things that we think about as an organization is that automation is so much more than transportation safety. And so when we have conversations with our stakeholders trying to help them understand the benefits, the opportunities that this automation poses, is reflecting on the 6 values that Minnesota has embodied. And I believe this is very evident of the work that's already happening in Pennsylvania. But one of the things that I would like to bring to the conversation today is that automation readiness is also about equitable transportation. And especially as we celebrate the new year, which doesn't feel that new in 2021, we have learned a lot in the last year in renewed conversations on racial justice, social justice, equity, and the role transportation has to play. I live in our offices in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where 50 years ago, we decimated a community called Rondo by building the interstate system. We are not going to do that again when we build a new system and infrastructure for connected and autonomous vehicles. And that's because we're having conversations like this today. But I would be remiss if we don't also talk about the opportunities to upskill and reskill workers, to ensure we have a more safe and efficient transportation system and TISMO and ITS operations, to understand how we can grow the economy, small businesses and businesses of all sizes, make sure that we continue to rethink a new structure for infrastructure investment long into the future, and helping to make sure that all of these technologies are sustainable and thinking towards the future. Next slide. Don't you just love when we're in these conversations, we have to repeatedly ask next slide, but I really appreciate the entire ITS Pennsylvania team who's helped us coordinate this fantastic webinar today. I just want to share a little bit about our structure and who we are before I dive into conversations with the rest of my esteemed panelists. So like Pennsylvania, Minnesota also has a statewide Governor's Advisory Council. And we believe these task forces are critical to setting the vision, the strategy, the structure for that long range future that I mentioned we are in desperate need of. The second thing that we think is also very valuable is expanding that into an all-state and regional alliance. We call ours the CAB Innovation Alliance, that is a P4 model, where it's, of course, public and private partners, but bringing in people, communities into the conversation, as well as philanthropic partners and other nonprofits who are critical parts of community and economic development. With that, we're focusing on a few key priorities that I can touch on later today, including safety, connectivity, infrastructure readiness, and most importantly for our program, outreach and engagement. The other thing that we're readily available and willing to coordinate on is in our policy work. So we have an interagency team with all local levels of government and academia who propose bills and policy and regulations for our state and region, as well as have an immediate preparedness should a new policy come to play, such as personal delivery devices, as I know have recently been a top issue in Pennsylvania. We are very fortunate, as I'm executive director of a program that's housed in our Department of Transportation and leads all of the states and regional work related to connected vehicle automation. And that is an 8-person team that is multidisciplinary. And so one of the things I want to make sure we talk about today is it takes all types of knowledge bases. I am actually a lawyer for the past 18 years, and I use that policy and litigation background to help us be more strategic in how we plan for long-range policy. And that means that I need technical experts that help inform me and advise our program from every type of aspect, from policy, planning, civil engineering, and the many other aspects we will talk about today. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our history to give some context. We are only 2.5 years old, and yet we want to showcase that there is an opportunity for all regions, all communities in Pennsylvania and beyond to really immediately innovate together in a collaborative method. Because less than 3 years ago, we attended a summit in Florida where we recognized immediately that with the fall of snow that's happening outside my windowed office today, this technology will not be able to operate unless collaboratively we start to validate and deploy that technology together. So with that, we actually brought in one of the level 4 autonomous providers to our testing facility in northern Minnesota into the bold, cold north, and actually realized the technology was not where we needed it to be to even test and pilot in our colder region in the bold north. And in order to move this project forward, we did a few things. We engaged the public. We asked policymakers, community leaders, and members of all communities, including those who are here represented in this image with the American Council of the Blind, to ask, what would you like to see with this automation? It's not just about the engineering infrastructure readiness, but it's about the community and economic development and engagement. And so with those conversations, we developed a collaborative executive order, very similar to what some of the 20 plus other states across America did over the last 2 years, and established our state task force, our office, our interagency program, and really created the basis of the vision for our work moving forward. And with that, we've implemented over the past 2 years, all of the things I just mentioned on the previous slide. Next slide, please. One of the things that I want to share that's key to our program is this collaborative, holistic approach to infrastructure readiness. So I will be typing into the chat box information and hyperlink to our program website page, but we focus on 6 key priorities, and readiness is embodied in all 6 of these. One is it's very important to continue conversations like this, leading, convening, listening to partners, and documenting the work and collaboration moving forward. 2 is developing innovative public-private partnerships, similar to Minnesota's unique CAB Challenge program, which has won awards from procurement and government specialists, because the traditional model that we've used in developing these automation partnerships cannot be the same toolkit that we solve for tomorrow's challenges. The other thing we're doing is helping to fill in the gaps in national research by having more innovative projects that are taking the lessons that you're learning in Pennsylvania and all the way to California and building on that to help inform the conversation, and not simply try to one-up one state or one region, but help add to the research narrative. And of course, putting my lawyer hat on, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about policy and strategic planning and regulations. So we take all of our policy work and build that into a long-range plan, including one of the country's first comprehensive plans, the MnDOT CAB strategic plan, which looks at all functional business areas of your state and your organization, especially such as the Turnpike and the DOT, and understanding how we need to plan for the next 5 to 15 years. And that is the last thing I want to talk about today in my remaining time with you all, is the fact that education and outreach is the foundation of any true program on infrastructure readiness. Next slide. One of the things that we think is absolutely critical is using public education and a very fundamental and holistic model to build a program for infrastructure readiness. So with the CAB Challenge program that I mentioned, we challenge industry, academia, community members, nonprofits, and of course all of you to come with ideas to the state who's put money on the table and said, if you have a unique, innovative, bold idea that helps address community transportation needs, let's talk about it. And with that, we have a confidential workshopping method that helps implement some of the key items you see on this slide today. We're taking a very fundamental look at infrastructure readiness. It's so much more beyond the FCC regulations. It's much more beyond the MUTCD pavement markings. It's about how the community sees us investing in their transportation future. Next slide. And the last thing I want to share today is that I really hope that we have a robust conversation on the collaboration between equity and the ability for infrastructure readiness to have conversations with communities to think about how we can collaboratively move this work forward. In Minnesota, we will be publishing in the next 2 months a comprehensive framework that shows how strategic communications and engagement paired with community workshops and real-time demonstrations can show that over 79% of actual Minnesotans who've been engaged in demonstrations support the policy that my colleague John Corbin just mentioned. And the more that we pair real-time demonstrations and engagement, we will be able to develop a comprehensive and collaborative infrastructure readiness strategy that meets all of our needs from government, industry, and beyond. With that, I want to thank everyone, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And same thing, if anyone has any questions for Kristen, please feel free to shoot them off in the chat. And then next we have Sam Ammon from Caltrans.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you, Sam.
Thank you. My name is Sam Aman. I'm from Caltrans, California DOT. My job is, I have many hats. So one of them is I manage San Diego Regional Proving Ground. I'm also manage the CAV program. So we are entity of 3 agencies: Caltrans, SANDAG, which is a Metropolitan Planning Organization, and City of Chula Vista, with partner with the Marine and USDOT. So today I'm going to cover what we are doing in California. Next slide, please. So the region, the SDRPG, San Diego Regional Proving Ground, it's focused in looking at the real world environment for validation or validating the innovative technology. So we look at any kind of technologies that advance mobility, safety, sustainability, and economic perspective, prosperity. But the focus of what we're doing is mainly transportation. So next slide, please. So one of the objectives that we're trying to improve here is improve mobility, get access to disadvantaged population, serving first and last mile, hopefully by improving some of the level 5 shuttles. We share best practice. It's extremely important for us to do that, because a lot of time you think that AV is here or connected vehicle can be done by just local agency by themselves, but actually, as we are working with our partners, we learn so much about the technology and how we can actually look at the future with our infrastructure. We also work a lot with research and data sharing. Data sharing has become a big challenge, as most of the companies right now looking at those data as a valuable resource for them. We also, we don't want to repeat researches that's been done in other places within the nation. We facilitate planning, implementation, operation, evaluation of connected vehicle technology as well. Next slide, please. So this is the site when we started. We have few routes. So remember, we are a government agency. So we own the freeway, and that's what we allow for testing. So it's a real facility that they test those technology. We identify the I-15, 125 is the toll road, and we add the toll road, the 905 in the South Bay. Those facilities, sometime we close it for 12 hours to do autonomous testing. Also, we partner with many companies to do some connected technology to test those technology and validate it. We were able to upgrade some of the state and local agencies' vehicles to make them connected so we can test the technology ourselves. We have a closed facility, as you see in the left-hand side. Those are inside Miramar Bays, Marine Bays. So they are closed facilities. They are not public roads. So partnership with the Marine Bays allow us to test those vehicles that's not allowed to test on a public road in California. I'm not sure if all you know that we have a lot of regulation related to automated vehicle in California. One of them is any vehicles above 10,000 pounds. It's not allowed in a public road. It needs to be in a closed facility. So also we have some facilities that we allow for staging and small testing as well. Next slide, please. So what the benefit for us, California DOT? First is improved safety, and that's our main focus when we start looking at those testing. And we partner with all car manufacturers when they come, and we told them what is the main problem for safety with a wrong way drive, fixed object. We have a ladder in our county. Every day we have a report ladder fall from a vehicle in a main lane. So how are we going to be able to improve that safety aspect of it? We also look at the first and last mile solution, so we can serve people to go to the transit station and they can be able to have more mobility with a disadvantaged community or elders. We also, then California, we look at the reduced vehicle mile travel. And that's by basically sharing level 5 vehicle to serve that purpose. We are looking at partnership, and we realize that there is no way you can deliver connected vehicle without partnership. This is one of the discovery from the proving ground. We look at the future infrastructure need when we're going to have a mixed fleet between automated vehicle and non-automated vehicle, and that may last years, could be 20 years before we have everybody automated and connected. And also, one of our main focus as California DOT is how we look at the impact for future incident investigation. So we've been testing many black boxes on those vehicles and how we can be able to retrieve it or communicate to the infrastructure, so we find how those accidents can actually happen and we can try to prevent it. Next slide, please. So as you see here in the picture, this is my last slide. This is our consortium. Where all the partner government agencies that we are got together and trying to not only test those technology and validate it, but also write the regulation for California. And I'm looking forward for more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And next up, we have Karina Ricks from the city of Pittsburgh.
Great. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. Pittsburgh's been very active and hosted. Been pleased to host several of the AV summits over the last few years. So sorry we didn't get a chance to see all of you this year, but we'll hope to see you soon. If you want to go to the next slide. So I'm the director of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We are essentially the Department of Transportation for the city of Pittsburgh. And you know, all of the work that we do for autonomous vehicles and anything else is really rooted in this question of what are we solving for? What are our values? It's really easy, I think, to be dazzled and seduced by sexy new technologies and innovations. But if it doesn't solve fundamental issues for our community, we really have to question what we're pursuing this for, much like what Kristen alluded to. So if you go to the next slide, our department is really focused around 5 fundamental goals that we're pursuing in everything that we do, whether that's an infrastructure investment, a new mobility service, the management and operation of our system. First and foremost is safety that underlies all transportation departments. That we do believe, and pleased to see the sentiments of our new Secretary of Transportation, that no one should die traveling on our city streets or simply getting from A to B. And we believe that this is achievable and we can pursue it. And AVs do have a role to play in that goal. Secondly is access, and that we really need to know what people are traveling for. They're traveling for a purpose. We use as a benchmark that all households should be able to get to fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home. That's the ice cream test, if they can buy their ice cream and get home before it melts, and that they should be able to do this without the requirement of a private automobile. Transportation costs are significant in Pittsburgh in particular. They are on par with housing costs. And in some cases actually exceed the cost of housing. And we really work toward the goal that no household needs to spend more than 45% of its income on basic housing, and basic transportation is a human right. And we're really intent on trying to meet that. You know, also just joy, that walking, rolling, and bicycling should be the easiest and most enjoyable choice for trips less than 1 mile. And this is something that we are focused on when we think about autonomous vehicles and their role in our system of systems. Right now, we have more than 20% of motor vehicle trips are less than 1 mile in distance in our city, or at least were prior to the pandemic. We need to do better than that. 40% of the trips within the confines of our little 54 square miles, 40% of trips are less than 2 miles in distance, and they are driven. So we need to think about the implications of moving people to less space-consuming modes, more environmentally friendly modes. And finally, community is a big part of Pittsburgh's identity. And so making sure that our streets reflect the values of our city and our people. We align ourselves, of course, with our native son, Mr. Rogers, But not all of our streets maybe reflect that kind of neighborly inclusion that we'd like to tell the story about ourselves. So really thinking about that. If you go to the next slide, we today also have 4 imperatives that have really come to light. I also have a dog, so we'll just keep pressing through. The COVID crisis obviously has changed everything about the way that we move, the time of travel, the routes of travel, the purposes of travel, the volume of travel. And so as we think about preparing for changes to mobility investments in our infrastructure, I think that we can't use 2019 thinking in evaluating these now. We need to understand that things have changed. I don't think that there is a going back to normal. We need to think about going toward the future, and what does that mean with what we've learned through this pandemic. Systemic racism is real, and we recognize that in the city of Pittsburgh. We need to actively and purposefully pursue mobility justice and really look at things through that lens. Climate change is a key concern. Mayor Peduto has been a leading advocate to address the effects of climate change, and in particular, looking at our transportation emissions. We need to think about our infrastructure and how we invest in electrification, particularly for these vehicles that actually consume quite a bit of electric power as they're doing their onboard computing, and how we're going to make sure that these are electric powered vehicles and not the internal combustion that many of the autonomous vehicles are right now. And then investing in growth. How do we optimize the assets for all and for all time where we're investing? You go to the next slide, just quickly, some of the things that we are focused on in Pittsburgh. If you can flip the slide. Thanks. We do have a number of autonomous vehicle testers in the city. We too are an autonomous vehicle proving ground, and proud to be that. So working with our testers that are here, having open dialogues with them, we're really very grateful for the openness and participation that we get from our 5 testers, and of course our leading research institution of Carnegie Mellon, who's here. We have, as has Minnesota, in addition to the state guidance on testing, we have developed and implemented a local mayor's order that relates to autonomous vehicle testing, so that there is a need to interact at the local level for this. We have quite a bit going on there of needing to know who is testing, what the purposes are, what are the ODDs, data sharing and collaboration with things like our public safety offices, our Department of City Planning, our urban design questions, and our regional partners. We are, focused on looking at, human-centered design and how can we test demonstration projects here that really serve those fundamental needs that we set ourselves to. And so we have run, for example, a few pilots with, and we'll run a couple of more with the personal delivery devices to learn about how can that work in an inclusive way, working closely with our disability community, working closely with communities of color to understand how that's used. Public engagement and understanding, we are fortunate to have received a grant from the Knight Foundation that is really focused on working with the public to bring them into the decision making around how not only this technology will be developed and demonstrated, but ultimately how it will be deployed in our city and the public policy guide rails that we may need to put in place to ensure that it is a service that disrupts the status quo of an auto-oriented city and brings forward a more inclusive and sustainable mobility future. We're working on policy development and municipal preparedness, so understanding what are the implications of a shift, how does that affect the future of work and the workforce in our city? How does it affect our own municipal finances and revenue generation that we get from today's transportation systems? How do we work with our regional and adjacent jurisdictional partners to make sure that we're addressing some of those cross-border questions, and then trying to get ahead of some of the land use and street management things. Parking is managed at the local level. Zoning that relates to the amount of parking that needs to be provided. How do we look forward there? Local street design decisions, so that we can anticipate what the testers are doing right now, or understand from the testers how they are mapping and experiencing the street, but also recognizing that we make street investments, once every 80 years. So really trying to make sure that those are the most prudent investments. We're working on, we have, as Mayor Peduto likes to articulate, the smartest streetlights in the world. And we're working to make those even smarter through an ATC MTD grant for our smart spines. So looking at how that will interact with our autonomous vehicles. And then the question of electrification and the shared economy. We do believe that the future is shared autonomous and electric, but there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure that needs to be put in place to really achieve that future. You can go to just the last slide then. We have signed on to the shared and autonomous mobility principles. Once again, Paris and Pittsburgh were the two initial municipal signatories, along with a number of private entities around the globe. And so again, these are some of the principles that really guide us as we think about how we move toward eventual deployment in the city of Pittsburgh for shared and autonomous mobility in our city, and trying to root it in the values that we hold. So that's it for me.
Thanks very much, Karina, and same thing for the other speakers. If everyone has any questions for Karina, please feel free to post them in the chat. And next we have Andrew Wolpert from Smart Columbus.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Next slide, please. Well, thanks everyone for joining. And I must say, it's really reassuring to listen to Kristen, Sam, and Karina's story. It makes me feel much better about how we're pursuing Smart Columbus and City of Columbus goals and outcomes and objectives. There's a lot of similarities there. Smart Columbus was born about 5 years ago when City of Columbus won the USDOT Smart City Challenge, which allocated $40 million to implement smart city technologies within the City of Columbus. We've had AV deployments and CV deployments as part of our program. I'm going to review a couple of our AV deployments in our connected vehicle project. Our first deployment was called the Smart Circuit. That was in downtown Columbus. It was really a learning experience for us. It served as that educational purpose for deployment, and really allowed the project team to learn through the process, develop some lessons learned. It connected people to educational and cultural resources in downtown Columbus, and so we got lots of feedback throughout the process, so it worked out well. Next slide, please. For that deployment, we contracted with May Mobility. Contract was a total turnkey AV shuttle operations, so operations, maintenance, storage, charging, everything was their responsibility. It was a one-year contract. The deployment lasted about 10 months. May Mobility was evaluated on their past performance, proposed approach, and price, and we were happy with how the deployment went. Next slide, please. Our next deployment is in the Linden area. That is an opportunity neighborhood within the City of Columbus. This neighborhood has had some challenges economically, socially over the years, and we're trying to provide that equitable transportation and opportunities to the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So for this deployment, we really wanted to define a purpose for this deployment, and we looked at several routes within the city, looking at different use cases and user needs. With this deployment, We really want to connect community to jobs and services. So there's community centers in the area, opportunity centers, sources for food bank, support services, and smart mobility hubs, which is one of the other projects, Smart Columbus. That first mile, last mile challenge, really connecting people to goods and services, particularly Central Ohio Transit Authority, which is our transit agency here in Central Ohio. Next slide, please. For this deployment, we selected Easy Mile. You can see the shuttles there on the right-hand side of the screen. With this, we also wanted to find some guidelines so that other cities, agencies could learn from our experiences. So procurement guidelines, operational guidelines, testing guidelines. These are all things that we developed. They are available on the Smart Columbus website so that you can download those documents today and review, and hopefully it provides information and helps you with your future deployments. Next slide, please. This is the route we selected for Linden. You can see it is in a residential area. It's a mixed-use environment. This connects to two of our smart mobility hubs, the Linden Transit Center, which is in our lower left-hand corner. That's one of CODA's main transit centers. In the upper right-hand corner, St. Stephen's Community House. This provides education, food bank, medical services, daycare services for the community, so it's a valuable asset to the Linden area. And with this, we're really trying to solve that first mile, last mile gap and connect people to CODA, their bus rapid transit line that runs along Cleveland Avenue and stops at the Linden Transit Center. Next slide, please. Next, our connected vehicle environment. Just briefly going to cover this. Next slide, please. So for this project, we have installed roadside units along 3 corridors in the city of Columbus: High Street, Cleveland Avenue, Morse Road. There's 86 roadside units that have been installed, and we've been recruiting participants to install onboard units, onboard equipment in their vehicles. Right now, we have about 1,000 vehicles with OBUs. Over 300 are private vehicles. About 350 are transit from the buses from Central Ohio Transit Authority, and the remaining ones are primarily city fleet vehicles. We do have some 15 freight vehicles also for freight signal priority that we're running in one of our heavy trucking and freight areas. Next slide, please. And here's just an overview of all the applications that we're deploying as part of the Smart Columbus program, where it's vehicle infrastructure applications. Not every vehicle is receiving all these applications, so you can see those on the screen there. And I believe that was the last slide, and I'd love to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks all of the panelists for your introductions and those presentations on what you're working on. For the last half hour, we'd like to begin the panel discussion and open it off with some questions. At any point, if you would have a question for the members of our panel, we would ask that you would put it in the chat, and we have somebody monitoring that, and we can ask them to. But to get it started off, I'm going to open this question up to everyone. And what I want to say is, what do you think that, we have federal, state, and local level all represented on our panel. How do you see each one of your roles in regard to infrastructure readiness, education, and communication? And what are the expectations for state and local governments to how you're going to coordinate with the federal level as well? So I don't know, John, maybe I'll go back to you as you were the first speaker. We can go down the line.
Yeah, so I think some of this speaks to the issue of federal role and what the federal role is and what the federal role is not, and how that contributes to national community building. And I think what we've seen, over the last few years, and it's kind of punctuated by the AV comprehensive plan, and it's great to see Finch Fulton on the call, because his leadership was vital to both that product and this tone. that in many respects, the primary value of the federal role is to enable and support national conversation and collaboration and alignment in a way that's balanced, in a way that's objective, and in a way that's actionable. And I think, secondly, it's towards this issue of facilitating out of the gate, not necessarily rigid, constrained regulations as much as it is facilitating a harmonization of consensus-based standards, ultimately to enable eventual national consistency. I think the final thing I'll observe about the federal role is the awareness that when it comes to collaboration and education and building relationships between federal, state, and local, but also between public and private sector, there's a need to distinguish between the desirable federal role in promoting consistency in the nodes of the network, these delicate, precious, economically vital urban environments that, as both Kristen and Corinna alluded to this, that have the right to define their community values and their priorities, and ensure a culture and a community that is distinct and unique. The role of consistency there is different than the role of consistency at the national network level, the interstate highway system, the energy grid. So to the extent that the question alludes to what is the federal role in this context, that's what I am seeing and experiencing. That's what I think you see in the AE comprehensive plan, and I trust that will continue to be and maybe even be accelerated as an understanding moving forward.
I think that would leave me next. Thanks, it's a great question. And I'm going to preliminarily answer it with 3 words we hear all the time, but we don't define, and that is coordination, collaboration, and engagement. So first, when it comes to coordination, we need statewide alliances. We need interagency teams. We need institutions and models that bring all these people together so that when the time is right, whether it's ongoing or an immediate need, you can immediately talk to your city engineer, your nonprofit community organizer, your person who's called the governor's office because their transit service provider completely cuts them out of their community service need. It means state governments coming together. And so some examples of this, of course, I mentioned in my presentation with interagency CAB collaboratives, innovation alliances. Texas has another similar model. But also I want to recognize some of the work on the East Coast in the regional models, such as the Eastern Transportation Coalition, MASTO, the 10 states in the Midwest have come together because, as we all know, and we didn't really touch on today, the technology does not end at any sort of, implicit border on a map. It must continue to be interoperable. Second, with respect to collaboration, that's where roles like the FHWA and John's excellent leadership in convening people together is so important. And so AASHTO, the state DOTs, NACTO, the city transportation officials, SAE, ITS America, these are all coalitions that help us have those convening spaces and help talk with one voice. But the third thing I would end with is that voice has to be engaged. And engagement is not just me doing this. What I'm doing is talking at you all, right, to a community member. It is empathetic listening. It is engagement directly. It is uplifting those voices and empowering those voices in a model similar to the International Association for Public Participation to use human-centered design principles that, frankly, are quite lacking in the conversations to date. But I'm really excited that with my colleagues on the call today, we can have a conversation about creating a national strategy and vision that does listen to the lived experiences of the people who live in our communities and use transportation systems.
So I'll just then pop in as a local representative that, obviously we have a huge role to play in this because, the federal partners are heavy funders of this, and we're only too happy to help you expend those resources and take more as a new transportation bill is on its way. But the states and the localities are the owners ultimately of the facilities. And so, figuring out where those investments are, how we do that, forward flexible design, how we standardize it across jurisdictional boundaries. These are all really important questions. I think a question that we would seek is what needs to be prioritized. We do live in a resource limited environment. That seems like that's going to be the case for the foreseeable future. So do I really put those limited resources toward a fiber backhaul system and really emphasizing that communication network? Do I look at it as more the electrification side of things? Is it really just structural legibility in the pavement markings and signage? Knowing that there is limited resources, hearing from the industry and knowing where we need to really emphasize that would be infinitely valuable.
Thanks, Karina. And Kristen, I saw you just replied in the chat, but maybe I'll open that question from Nolan up to everyone. The question was, do you think the private sector should be investing in our infrastructure in order to operate automated vehicles on state and local roads? Should this be accomplished via public-private partnership? Kristen, if you want to lead us off with that.
I don't want to overtake the conversation, but I have many opinions on this. There's some amazing states, Georgia, Utah, Minnesota's joining that conversation and rethinking the investment models of the future. And that is, I don't want to say just a public-private partnership. We really have to expand that into that P4 model, bringing philanthropy and community into that. The traditional way of how we've invested in the system over the last 100 years, Minnesota is celebrating their centennial this year, needs to be completely rethought. Let's take a blank slate and really challenge our federal and national leaders to rethink, Secretary Pete, if you're listening, how we invest in the infrastructure of the future. So I'll end there, and I'd be happy to hear my colleagues' ideas.
Yeah, so this is so I'll chime in and maybe just spin to the edge of the P3 conversation, more so in the context of what I'll characterize as what is maybe rhetorically, what is the institutional viability? What is institutionally viable as a national transportation digital infrastructure development approach? In other words, if a lot of what we're talking about, and it relates to some extent to electrification, it relates to enabling kind of a national transportation network, kind of edge cloud intelligence to support automation, but also more broadly connectivity. The conventional model has been your money channeled through the federal government comes back to you for the purpose of building infrastructure, roads, bridges, ITS devices, and other things. How do you maintain it? How do you operate it? Well, that's a separate conversation. And so this issue of what is the scale and business model for national transportation digital infrastructure in a life cycle system management way that is institutionally feasible and institutionally viable. And I think that demands a new model. And I'm not going to presume to propose what it is, but I think the role of the private sector, the role of industry, the public utilities model, perhaps, for national scale digital infrastructure needs to be considered. And if you look at how the EU, you look at how Sweden and Scandinavian countries, you look at how China, not that I would hold up much of China as a model in general, but when it comes to integrating technology, they're kind of unmitigated totalitarian strong federal approach illustrates that in order to compete with that, we're going to have to be innovative, I think, first and foremost in our business model. And I think the role of industry at a national digital infrastructure scale is going to have to be very different than it's been historically in localized ITS device construction.
All right, let me jump in. For California, at least as we're looking at the partnership, we realized quickly that we're a big ship. Most of state DOT are big ships. To move to make the infrastructure connected, it's going to take years. I program a project now, it gets built 4 years later. So the technology movement and the money required to make the infrastructure actually move faster, to be more connected and more AV friendly, it must happen with public-private partnership. It's not going to be visible with our movement of delivering regular projects. Half of the state, I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on in California, half of the roads in the states are closed in the past 2 years 2 days or 3 days because of the snow in the north of California. We're still looking at how we're going to tell the vehicles there is a snow. We're not used to snow. So when we have snow, everything gets closed. So we've been talking with automated vehicle, with the ice happen, with the snow happen, with the big wind happen, how the vehicle can react. As probably most of you, the technical side understand it, is there is 2 types of vehicles out there. There is the connected vehicle and there is the automated vehicle. But some of the automated vehicles don't depend on the infrastructure. They just automated and they refuse to be connected, like Tesla, for example, but there is many others. So again, there is a bigger technology partnership issues that we're trying to get them all in the same table so they can be able to receive advance notice for things like that. So I see the partnership is extremely important. Also, one of the things that we learn from, again, working with car manufacturers in the testing, I can make the infrastructure as connected as I want. But if the vehicle doesn't receive the message, it's useless. I just want them to know, but they won't receive it. With the latest regulations limiting the bandwidth, we need to be wise what we're going to be connected with. Are we going to focus on the safety or mobility? What other things? Because the bandwidth will not going to be enough for everything. Of course, not right now. In the beginning, it's going to be enough. But once all the cars are connected, it won't be enough. So again, all those technical things that is going to help us actually put the regulation together. But lastly, I didn't comment in the previous question. We have one of the major border with Mexico. So one of the, I'm not looking even only about the federal rules and make things standard between states. I want to actually see the federal rules, how we're going to connect with other countries like Canada and Mexico, especially for the freight side of it. And we've been talking about that. Some of the border here in San Diego, the trucks stay for 3 hours waiting. And we've been talking about automated that, so we don't have to have drivers. So how are we going to be able to do that without that discussion already start open between Canada and Mexico? So those are the stuff that we're looking up to the federal government to start the talks about it. One last thing, again, I'm sorry I'm taking so long. One of the example of what I'm saying is Tesla. Tesla, you drive it in California, you have to put your hands on it, on a steering wheel. You cross the border to Arizona, that requirement already gone. So the car manufacturer solved the issue, but it should not be done this way. You should drive the same way across the states. So again, without having some kind of guidance from the federal side, I think that will be a struggle a little bit. Thank you.
I'll just add real quick from City of Columbus perspective. For the P3, yeah, I mean, we have limited resources and funding here in Ohio, definitely. And so, you know, P3 is the way that the state has been going towards for projects, particularly heavy highway projects. When you start getting into that digital infrastructure, I think one of the things we need to be cognizant of is the data and private companies having access to that data, ensuring that we're not releasing any PII, who has access to that and so forth. This is something we need to be thinking about, be cognizant of as P3 becomes more and more prevalent. And going back to, from the government aspect of things, from the federal side, with Columbus, we had a lot of resources from the USDOT, which is really helpful for us. One of the lessons learned was working with NHTSA. NHTSA has a lot of experience, obviously, with AV deployments around the country. And they provided a lot of really good feedback for us. Our route was, they said, the most complex that they had received to date for review. And so maybe the federal government can help with providing some guidelines, some information to help the cities in trying to define some of these routes, because you can't deploy until you have that approval, in our case, with the Easy Mile shuttle. And then at a local level, I think everybody's stated this, but I'll just echo it. It's just don't deploy technology for technology's sake. Talk to the stakeholders at the local government level, in the neighborhoods, and define those use cases and scenarios so you can ensure that you're going to have a successful deployment.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Another question that came through in the chat that I think is, everyone could chime in on is what legislative action is needed at all levels to allow AV and CAV technology to thrive? Kristen, I see you're smiling and you said that you were a lawyer before, so I don't know if you want to kick it off again, not to put you on the spot.
Oh, y'all know lawyers charge by the word, so I will try and be brief. This is such a fundamental challenge because we have to walk a fine balance between what we heard from my colleagues, Andrew and Karina, in allowing them to be these innovative, democratic, bold incubators of ideas, while also navigating the challenge of interoperability and uniform standards. So to date, we've had bills at the federal level, AV START Act, et cetera, that have tried to do a really excellent job defining what automation is, the systems that we need, the data standards that Andrew mentioned, which is a huge topic in and of itself for our conversation. But I do think we need to avoid this patchwork approach that has happened to date. So one of the things we in Masto and AASHTO are trying to think about is how can we develop that framework that allows, as my colleague in California noted, some sort of more clarification on what the restrictions are with the driver behind the wheel or otherwise. And there's many, many things that we need to think about here, and that would, again, take another hour. But absolutely, I fundamentally think we need some guidance from our Congress into what that legislation looks like while navigating that very fine line to make sure we are not preempting states and local governments from doing what they do best.
Any of the other panelists want to weigh in?
So I haven't been a federal employee that long, about 6 years, but I do know enough that if I get on a recorded webinar and start proposing legislative solutions, you would never see me again. So I'm not going to do that. At least you wouldn't see me again as a federal employee. But what I will resonate with is this issue of more proactive collaboration at a national level. So distinguishing federal from national. This is another example, and I think every other panelist made this case at some point, that it is this collaboration, again, between levels of government, but also between public and private sector, where the industry on the private sector side is not just the automotive industry, it's telecommunications industry, it's the data and analytics and mapping industry, and having a conversation that is nearly continuous is vital to informing legislative action at any level. That isn't necessarily what happens right now. And even if there is a restoration, for example, of a federal advisory committee on automation, that'll be a kind of a very focused, kind of very structured, bureaucratic conversation. There needs to be a much more nimble, collaboration-based strategy for how automation and other emerging technologies could be integrated at a national network scale as a basis for federal policy and legislative action. And again, I'll point back to the AV Comprehensive Plan. I think that's a good cornerstone, at least one of maybe a few cornerstones that hopefully will enable that understanding of a federal role to support that national collaborative environment.
I'll just jump in and say, this is complex and it's a changing landscape. We tend in discussions like this to, when we talk about autonomous vehicles, we tend to think of the form factors of typical passenger vehicles, maybe freight delivery trucks. But autonomous technology and the self-driving systems are, they're bending beyond those conventional form factors. So I don't really have an answer to this question about where should the legislation, what kind of legislation is needed. Definitely +1 on Kristen's don't preempt the localities, because we do need to deal with it at the very local level. And so things like personal delivery devices, those things that are not necessarily traveling great distances, cross-jurisdictional boundaries, there needs to be quite a bit of flexibility left to the localities to govern those things appropriately for our culture. Lancaster, is with the Amish and Mennonite community there is a very different community than Center City, Philadelphia, or some of our neighborhoods here in Pittsburgh. So, but I do think that we're going to have to tackle this question of legislation for different form factors, what autonomy means. How are we going to deal with that? You know, there's aerial. I know. Sam probably out in California has had to deal with aerial autonomous mobility much more than we have here, but it's coming for all of us. So not a question, not an answer, but really just a struggle of. I think that these convenient silos that we've created around what is a quote unquote autonomous vehicle are probably not going to serve us long into the future, and we're going to have to wrestle with this sort of cross-modal governance. And I see John shaking his head in agreement.
All right, we're coming down to the end. I guess we have 10 minutes left, so maybe 5 more minutes left of questions. I'll go back to one of our pre-canned questions as we're kind of ending this, and I'll just say, what is one development in emerging transportation connectivity technology that in the next 5 years excites each one of you the most? So I guess maybe if you could all just do a minute, if you can, on that, and then we can, close it out.
So I'll take a stab and just say it's no one technology. I mean, there's automation, there's electrification, there's kind of edge cloud intelligence, there's the interface, the kind of the 3Dification, the road air, ground air interface. It's actually the accelerating convergence of those technologies and the limitations on government to respond to the existing pace, let alone this accelerating pace. And it's estimated, for example, at the end of World War II, global knowledge doubled about every 25 years. Today, it's doubling faster than every 12 hours. So this accelerating convergence is only going to accelerate more so. So how do we collaboratively between federal, state, and local levels understand our respective and our joint limitations, integrate industry and university R&D enterprises as appropriate, and I think that's both phenomenally, almost overwhelmingly challenging sometimes when you think about it. But to me, that's the most exciting opportunity is to think about institutionally and collaboratively, how do we respond to something in a way that we just can't respond the way we've conventionally done it, which is very linear, very top down, and very, very slow.
I think I'm going to jump quickly with this one. I'm going to get a little bit in a technical side. So the most exciting thing we see is Internet of Things and how does that work with a connected vehicle for vulnerable users, pedestrian, bikes, scooters, and how we can be able to improve safety. We've been testing that here in many locations, and it's proving very promising technology for those vulnerable users. And that's including even limits speed for scooters and boardwalks and all this stuff. I see the connected vehicle is going beyond just vehicles. It's all users and of all mobility users, and that's very exciting because that's what the future looks like. People can use cars, can walk, can take a scooter, can take a bike, whatever it takes to whatever they make the mobility happening, and that's very exciting for the future.
I'll jump in real quick. I'll add on to what John said. I couldn't agree more with the convergence just of transportation in general and how it has evolved in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, 3 years ago, all of a sudden we have scooters pop into Columbus and they're going around all over the place. So I'll say that I'm really excited about the idea or concept of mobility as a service and bringing all these modes of transportation together to provide a safe, equitable transportation solution to communities. In Columbus, we're building a mobility as a service platform. Other cities, transit agencies are too. And so all those benefits of transportation advancements rolled into one to be able to provide that to somebody at their fingertips through a smartphone, I think is really cool, and I'm really excited to see how that advances here in the next few years.
Thanks, Andrew. Kristen, you want to go?
Certainly. I think I would actually like to propose a friendly amendment to the question. I think we're asking the wrong question. It's not about the technology. It's about the systems we're creating to harness these new technologies and how we engage those different coalitions and communities to address those needs. And so I am so excited about this rapid innovation in a time that 2020, many of us want to forget. The AV industry grew over 3% and rapidly excelled deployments. And that's because of the ability to innovate in how we delivered community goods to food shelves and medical supplies to the Mayo Clinic in Florida. And that is what is so exciting to me. And when we talk about the pandemic, Karina reminds us it's not the pandemic just about COVID-19. It is a pandemic and how we're leveraging technology solutions and innovation to address the long-stemming pandemic of racial injustice, climate change, how we address the Internet of Things that my colleagues mentioned. And so I'm very excited that we have conversations like this and how we harness the technology, which is a means to an end, to achieve the CAB principles that Karina and the Shared Use Mobility Center has embodied.
Thanks, Kristen. And Karina, I don't know if you want to chime in to close it out.
Well, I guess I'll close it out maybe where we all began this thing, which is that my excitement is still, with regard to safety. We are just now February 4th in this brand new year. Pittsburgh has already experienced a number of traffic fatalities. Most of them avoidable. We've had a number of injuries. We've had a number of more crashes here. All of them so far to date have involved the human operators of these vehicles. So, this is, it is a tragedy. It is avoidable. It's something that, I still, while I may have skepticism in some ways of what the unknown consequences of autonomous vehicles are, I'm confident that human beings have set a sufficiently low bar in our safety performance that we can only go up from here, and really looking forward to not having to have any more conversations with families or others who have lost a loved one on our streets.
Yep. Thanks, Karina. And I want to thank all of our panelists for their thoughtful answers and for all the great questions that we got from the audience today. I did want to note, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that this was the first one in the Summit series, but I'm happy to announce that the second event will be taking place on March 4th, same time from 2 to 3 p.m. It will be on safety and validation, and the webinar speakers for that session will include Phil Cutman and Michael Wagner from the Edge Case Research, Amy Chu from SAE's Automated Vehicle Safety Consortium, Maureen Brown from Munich Re, which is an insurance company, and Nat Boost from Uber. So more information and registration links will be sent out in the future, and make sure you check pasummit.org for all updates. And again, just one more thanks to all of our speakers and everyone for joining today, and especially SAE for being the sponsor, and ITSPA and Maysite, along with our conveners, PennDOT, PA Turnpike, and Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. So with that, if anyone doesn't have anything else, I'll let you get out 3 minutes early and back to your day. And thank you very much, everyone.